This is going to be a video with me voiceovering for the first time on how to make a end grain oak chopping board out of upcycled or recycled or second-hand used oak worktop. There's the oak worktop. It's been sun damaged and some of the edges are damaged, so it was no good for what the person originally bought it, so I bought it second hand off of eBay. The end product is going to be something very similar to this. So this is 38mm end grain oak block. We're using 40mm block today, so it'll be very similar to this but not quite the same. All end grain, nice little logo on the side, all the edges chamfered. This is one that I've just done the last water pop, so it just needs final sand and then oiling, but I'll take you through the whole process from start to finish. So the worktop obviously starts off flat, something similar to that. I then run it through the table saw, produce many flats. You can see this one is a used one that I've sanded down all the surface, repaired where needed. Once you've got all the blocks at the same thickness or height, you then glue, clamp, trim, sand, plain sand. You can do drip edges, you can do handles, and I shall probably take you through a little bit of all of that. This is one way of doing it, where you have all the blocks equal. I don't tend to do my chopping boards like that. I'm a man that likes offset, so I do it more in kind of like a brickwork pattern. That does mean that you get a bit of wastage along the end here, but you end up with with the joins only in one direction. In the other direction there's no continuous join line, so it's very much harder and very much more sturdy as a product. That's the project. Hope you like the voiceover. Give me some feedback, let me know if you do or you don't, and let's see how we get on. Because these edges are a little bit rough, I'm gonna whiz the Rotax over these edges. I won't bore you with the sanding because we all know sanding is the worst thing in life. I'll do that now, come back and we'll do the glue up. So I saved you all the sanding. And the next step is to get ready for glue up. So I know my cast iron table saw has got a flat bed, so that's a good place to be starting in terms of getting flat boards. I'm going to use parallel clamps, so these are Rutland's 1.5 metre parallel clamps, and I'm going to also try for the first time to use the parallel clamps, so clamp above and below as well as from the sides, to try and get them as close to flat across the whole surface as I possibly can. So I saved you the hassle of seeing me sand front and back, so you can see that's nowhere near as dirty as it was first time round. I've done that across each of the 22 boards, so they're ready to go. And now I'm going to get ready for a glue up, so I'm going to put you down and you can watch me glue up the first one. 24 hours later, glue's all dried up. Time to remove them from the clamps and get them ready for the next stage. So we have two 800mm linear rails, two 1200mm linear rails, some perspex from the local suppliers offcuts, and keeps the router perfectly level, and because of the way these linear bearings work, it resists any vertical as well as horizontal movement. Just got to quickly fix it to the bench, and then we can plane down our first board. So I'll do that and then get you ready, and you can see me plane it down. So, first side routed. As you can see the router marks going across it. It is smooth, and now we have a flat test. So, if we did well, and the router sled did what it's supposed to, we should have no rock. Lo and behold, we have no rock. Right, time to route side 2. So, planing complete, surfaces flat. Here's the imperfections I showed you last time, but the other board's over there. Exactly the same process for this board. On the router sled, backwards and forwards and forwards and backwards. The next process is to sand. So in terms of sanding, we're going to start off with a 40 grit sandpaper. Let's find somewhere for you to sit. So a 40 grit sandpaper. Then we'll go through all the grits that I've got, so 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 150, 180, 220, 320, with at least 2 water pops in between. The worst sand is the first sand, so the kind of 40 grit, to flatten it off on all 4 sides takes the longest, then 60, then 80. Once you get over 120, it does speed up. In terms of time, we've got probably about 4 hours now in these 4 boards in terms of making time. Elapsed time, just over a day and a half. So it takes a bit of time. It's not a 5-minute process to build these, and there's a lot of sanding. I would suspect somewhere near a day's sanding and routing and gluing and finishing to get these to a finished state, but I'll show you the process as we go along. So So, 1/4 inch router, chamfer bit, you can see in there, just a straight 45 is how I tend to do the boards. I tend to run on number 6. I set it for the depth counterclockwise, nothing more to than that other than taking your time and making sure you catch each and every corner. So here we go. New defenders back on. I nearly forgot a step. Before we can do the finish applying, we need to apply the branding. So very important that you make sure you know which is going to be the top and which is going to be the bottom, because for my brand it does have a top and a bottom. So I put the finger joints to the bottom, I put my brand on the right hand side of each long, and I try and centre it as best I can, so that it looks as neat as I can make it. It's not always easy because the branding is something I'm still getting my head around. The different thicknesses of boards and stuff, it's not easy to make a template out there. So I'm not quite sure the best way to do it just yet. So for now, what I tend to do is I mark it with a pencil, an upright, both sides of the board, and I line up branding iron on those marks, which I shall show you in a minute. Branding iron's just getting hot, whilst I'm marking these up. Here it is. I've got an end mark on each of the boards, and then wrong side, and then I've got horizontal marks to try and line it up. And on the branding iron, you can see it's in reverse, but there's the logo, and that's what we'll be applying to each of those once that gets hot enough. And it does need to be very hot. So whilst that's heating up, I'm just going to put you to one side, and then when it's ready, I'll record away. Right, so the branding iron's hot. Time to line up and apply to the first board. One side done. Time to turn it round. Do the other. What I've found is the general rule of thumb is that the embossing can be too dark, and that's okay, you can sand it back, but it needs to be light enough. So if you're in doubt, you want to be a little too much rather than not quite enough. Because as you just saw, putting it back on, it'll be a bit nerve-wracking. Okay, embossing applied. Switched off, let them cool off a bit, lightly sand them, and then we're on to finishing. To sand, all I normally do is knock them back with 320 or 220, that's usually enough. Always a good idea to use an eraser and get rid of the pencil lines first. Enough for now. So, on to the finishing process. I use Osmo's Extra Thin. Typically do one coat, sometimes two coats, depends how porous it is. And then I finish with top oil. And again, one or two coats, depending what it's telling you is needed. So, let's get on with it. I tend to be quite generous with the first cut. After all, this is end grain oak, so it's going to be thirsty. So start off with the bottom, applying a nice generous coat, working it in, not flooding it, not being too silly with it, but making sure that every part of the surface is touched and has some oil go into it. Just keep working it in. Because we've sanded it quite fine, the grain is going to be quite tight anyway. We've sanded most of the surface to a thing where the oars going to take a little bit more to get into it than if you'd have sanded it to 80 or 100 grit type stuff. The pores are still quite open and the oil will soak in a lot easier. So I tend to just be patient with it, and as you can see, as you rub it in, it does go in. You just need to give it a chance. Right, now it's time to oil the tops and on the sides. Next day, I've given these an extra coat, so they've had the 2 coats of top oil. I saved you the bother of watching that on video. In essence, the process was exactly the same as the first time round. Only thing left to now finish these boards is some little kind of bumper stops. So I use 3M. These are flat ones. Sometimes I use the dome head ones. You can find them on eBay, Amazon, wherever. And I just put one in each corner. Trying to get them as equally spaced as possible. And that is the last step for the boards. These boards are quite heavy, so you certainly won't have them moving all around the worktop when you're cutting things on, like a plastic board can do. I don't know what the weight is, but it's got to be a good couple of kilos. And obviously the benefit of a end grain board is that it doesn't dull the blades of quality knives quite as quickly. The thing that I like about them is actually when they're this thick, if you do get marks or your surface gets kind of deteriorated over time, you can just plane it back, re-sand it, re-oil it, and away you go. Maintenance, to be honest, I don't need much maintenance. Obviously you can't put them in a dishwasher. Sunlight is kind of a natural bending force to any wood really, so tend to try and keep the boards on edge, if not in use in the kitchen, just so that you get equal airflow top and bottom. Wash with warm soapy water, towel off, dry off relatively quickly afterwards. Don't leave them soaking in a wet sink, obviously. In terms of reapplying oil, every 6 months or so, just an extra little coat of oil, and you should get many years of use out of them. So, one more little flyby look. So, beautiful boards, embossed logos. What could be better? Thank you for watching.